Greetings and welcome to Holochain Citizen. Today I have a very special guest joining me, Moritz Bierling from Holo. So the interview you're about to see goes in some pretty wild directions. So I actually want to start this video by giving a brief overview of some themes that I took away from it. Having these themes already in mind from the start might help you to follow along as you listen. I'll put a timestamp link below if you want to skip this part and just go straight to the interview. So here are a few of the main themes that I identified. 1. Revisiting the dominant holochain versus blockchain narrative. Moritz talks about wanting the discourse around holochain to move away from Bitcoin and blockchain bashing and instead to see the good in these technologies without losing sight of the drawbacks. He sees how they have helped to create the conditions for Holochain to gain the prominence that it has, and wants to put Holochain in a history and context in a way that helps to build a bridge with even a Bitcoin maximalist. 2. Language, currencies, and other technologies as signaling systems to help align individual interest with collective interest. Moritz touches upon the larger projects of Scepter and metacurrency. The basic question here is, how do we, as a fully globalized civilization with billions of people, evolve our signaling systems to coordinate such complexity? One way to do this is to look at the cells in our body, who have already solved the same problem, and take inspiration from the signaling systems that they use. 3. Moritz talks about how a functional society must recognize the validity of diverse political inclinations. To link this with the second theme, if we can succeed in aligning individual interest with collective interest using better signaling systems, then ideally, both the libertarian and the communist can have their concerns validated and accounted for. And now, here's the interview. Hello, Moritz.
Hi, Brooks.
Thanks for agreeing to have this conversation with me.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to what we're going to explore today.
Yeah, me too. Cool. So I'll just jump right into the first question I have for you. So I've heard you mention recently that you're working on a series of new light papers. So I'd be curious to ask you to give us some insight into what you're working on and how you think it might change the current narrative around Holo and Holochain.
Yeah, definitely. So the light paper projects came out of a sort of need that David Atkinson saw, the commercial director of Holo, that came out of the conversations that he had with a lot of the projects and the potential partners that Holo and Holochain are constantly in conversations with for collaboration and for adoption of our technology and all those things. And in those conversations, he noticed a pretty persistent pattern of people who are coming to the crypto space with an insufficient understanding of what a cryptocurrency is, where it comes from, how it operates, and who, in trying to shift their business model or their company or their startup to spot sort of fake experts and to actually have the knowledge basis on which to make informed decisions about their currency design and their token design and sort of cryptonomics, all those very difficult subjects that require a good understanding of a pretty broad variety of fields, be that economics, cryptography, game theory, and various of those kind of fields that can take somebody a lifetime to really understand well. And there are far too many people out there that are passing themselves off as experts in an attempt to get lucrative consultancy deals where they can charge a lot of money for very entry-level understanding and then lead people into a situation where business owners and startup sort of visionaries and project stewards find themselves sort of 5 steps deep into the morass. Suddenly the advisor evaporates and they don't know what they're stuck with. They don't understand their own model and they don't know how to proceed. And so in trying to bring those conversations that he had week over week to a more productive level, he saw the need for finding a way to externalize the information that he had sort of stored up in experience and in documents, all that stuff in his head and elsewhere, out into the world in a way that would raise the floor of quality, in a sense, on the conversations that one could have with one another if people are willing to spend the time to familiarize themselves with a couple of ideas in a hopefully easy to understand format. And so over the course of the past 3 months, David and I have worked closely together on basically doing all the preliminary research and sort of real world testing of ideas and conversations and concepts and sort of relationships between concepts that we think will allow us in the coming several months, if not a year and a half, maybe even 2 years, develop a series of light papers that will lay out a sort of logical flow along various dimensions of how Holochain should properly be put into context in the broader world and sort of the history of ideas and technology, as well as allow us to produce some distinctions that people are failing to make when they assess Holochain as a technology in its own right, because they come with a lot of assumptions for what a technology that is sort of nominally in the crypto space needs to be or needs to look like, while having insufficient understanding to judge the difference between Holochain and others and make decisions based on that. And so we're going to touch on 4 separate issues that are of course all related, but the way we want to get to those light papers though is a sort of bit different. So we're not starting just with light papers and like just writing these light papers in a context that is just us sort of internally figuring something out and then bringing it out, but instead we want this to be a collaborative process and a process where a lot of feedback and social sort of social interaction is happening. And so what I've been doing the past 3 months is pulling in experts and friends and associates that I have in various fields, be that a Bitcoin maximalist perhaps, or a cryptographer, or an enterprise venture developer, or whatever it may be, people who have certain domain experience and have pretty strong views on some issues that may or may not overlap or like be the same as mine, pull those perspectives in, steelman those perspectives, as in the opposite of straw man, where you don't take somebody's arguments, make them as weak as you can, and then knock them down, but instead you steelman them, you build them up as strong as you can, and then you knock them down or you integrate them into your own perspective. And so one example of that would, for example, be me conversing with my friend who is a Bitcoin maximalist, taking notes while on the call, and then writing an entire article about steelmanning Bitcoin. Why is Bitcoin the greatest thing ever, and what are its prospects, and why is it such a great thing? And then that sort of doing that and doing it true to form and actually taking those arguments seriously and relating them with language to our own perspectives and our own goals and sort of legitimizing them in their own right, allows me then to have a much better understanding both where other people are coming from, as well as how I can build a bridge to their understanding that allows them to properly put into place or put each thing, if you will, into the proper limits or into the proper context, rather than comparing them sort of in a dumb way side by side and thinking they're competitors or they need to be like one needs to be good, the other needs to be bad, and just build a much deeper understanding of these things. And so that's sort of the process we've been engaging in so far, where I've already basically laid out and written one entire article series of about 5 articles so far, which we haven't published yet because I haven't felt comfortable yet with the overall narrative and the overall framing of Holochain. And so this is something that I've now developed in the past couple of weeks. I think 2 weeks ago, I sort of really hit on this idea that I'm going to go into in a second, which is that, well, I think we'll get there in a moment, but just to round off the process piece in a sense, we've been doing this process pretty much internally mostly, although I've definitely tested ideas that I've developed in other fora. I have a pretty extensive Facebook and Twitter and other social media network, and I'm in many different types of communities that have many different types of sort of goals and values. And so what I've been doing is I've been taking ideas and I've been sort of broadcasting them into different places, different communities, different friends and associates that I have, and then seeing what their reception of that is and how they respond to that. And then collecting all these responses, and then getting sort of a multi-perspectival view, emergent view on our narrative and our case and our sort of perception as well. And I think it quite neatly mirrors actually the nature of Holochain itself, where we would start with our sort of own hash chain, where I would commit an entry to my hash chain, which is basically just me speaking something, saying something, or sending a message in some way. And then somebody else does something with that information. And then that can get added or linked to the original entry. And so you get this sort of multi-perspectival view where your view isn't just your view, but it is an emergent view out of the views of other people that you yourself are in conversation with. And so I've started thinking about this in terms of different types of brains, even, if you will. Everybody knows what the brain is. We all have one, hopefully, between our ears. But there are sort of different types of brains beyond that. So this up here is our first brain, but then we also have a second brain, which I would call everything that is our tool set, what we sort of externalize into our environment, be that a computer, be that Evernote, be that pen and paper, basically everything that allows us to extend our mind into the world. And this goes even as far as your room. Your room is an externalization of your mind, and it betrays some things about you that you might not realize. If it is always in chaos and you are not happy about that, then probably your life is not completely at the point where you would like it to be. And so I'm bringing that up because the second brain allows you to extend your agency, which is a concept very central to Holochain, out into the world, and to have it basically travel through space and time more than your immediate environment would allow otherwise. Like literally to the point where literacy, which is our ability to perceive and to produce signals of communication and read, like basically symbols that are written down, which is a pretty new technology in a sense, like 3,000, 5,000 years old, depending on how you want to count it, is a so-called psychotechnology that allows you to converse with your future self. If you write something down in your journal or into a book or into a college like notebook or whatever it may be, you are able to revisit that thought later on, which you otherwise probably wouldn't be. And you wouldn't be able to engage in so-called rational analysis of things if you're not able to see your thoughts on paper or on whatever medium you have in front of you, because it would just be something occurring to you in your brain. And so that's sort of the second brain. And then what I've started thinking about a lot recently, also partially inspired by a new online course that I've been taking called Rite of Passage, which extends out of another online course I took 2 years ago, which is Building a Second Brain, actually, buildingasecondbrain.com. And this new course is basically about the third brain, how to, it talks about how to accelerate your career by writing online, but really what it is building a third brain, and your third brain is basically all the social sphere, the relationships, the people that you're in communicative exchange with that allow you to to process information and to act in the world and extend your agency into the world through the social sphere. And so something that I've started doing when I have work deliverables or I am stuck on a problem or I want to make progress quickly, rather than sequestering myself into some monastery and sort of in my room and just spending hours and hours racking my brain on an issue, which is very time consuming and energy consuming. Instead, what I will do is I will approach somebody in my community or my network or my friendship circle who I think has capacity in that area, and I will invite them in a sort of socially playful way to spend an hour working together with me. And so what I did, for example, recently in another project that I'm doing with Holo and Holochain, where I'm like stewarding some data, universal task data infrastructure project, I invited a developer friend of mine who has built a whole mind mapping tool on the web, and he and I spent an hour and he helped me figure out data entry types for the different software tools that we're using at Holo, which if I had done that by myself would have taken me hours and hours. And it would have made me learn things, but by doing this with somebody who was willing to spend the time, I not only got the value out of that and basically delivered on something in a much shorter amount of time, but I also strengthened our relationship, and I produced value for him too, because he now has a strong relationship with me as well. He's produced value to me. He can ask me to do things. And I actually offered, in coming to him and asking for his help, I offered him to use his tool, his online tool, implement some explanatory narrative in his mind mapping tool, and then use that to explain, for example, Holochain to people. And then other people might be getting interested in using this tool as well. And so it's a value exchange that's happening here in a sort of third brain manner, but it is not monetary value exchange. And it's that kind of social playfulness that I think people are a bit dumbfounded by when they sort of learn of Holochain for the first time, and they're not immediately able to put it into a box. Or if they are putting it into a box, it's probably the wrong box, because they don't understand all the context out of which emerged, and the sensibility and the motivations and the intentions and the values and the goals of the people who are creating it. And just as money is sort of an insufficient way of organizing society, like it has never been enough. There's always had to be communication, there had to be other types of currencies, other types of measurements. Monetary exchange is not the only way that we can move things in the world, in a sense. And so that's a lot of sort of deep background, if you will, going a bit into the conceptual architecture in my head on how I think about these things. But basically what I want to move into now that we have that research sort of complete, or rather to a point where I feel comfortable with the narrative that we've crafted, I am currently working on basically making this Holo light paper writing project a much more collaborative process than it is right now. Because right now it is mostly between David and I, and we are sort of the stewards of this project, but I want to expand that to include the community of some sort. And I'm currently playing around with ideas, so don't hold me to like, this will be what you will do, but the idea for me is to make visible our progress on these papers in some way, and show people our sort of current state of affairs in thinking about that. And by doing so, invite the collective intelligence of our community to contribute to this process by surfacing information that might be relevant to what we're writing about, to maybe provide feedback on ways of framing or phrasing things that might be landing or might not be landing very well. And in that way, make this truly a product of the Holo community and not just the Holo company. And I think this way of working holds a lot of potential, not only for Holo as a company or Holochain as a technology or even our community, but in general for the sort of distributed organization space that we are still seeing emerge slowly. And I look forward to seeing how other organizations might be taking a cue from that. And we can go into other questions in a minute as well, but one last thing I want to sort of tie in here is that this other project that I'm working on with the product director, Jameson Day, is basically about figuring out what all the different software tools we are using right now have in common in terms of data types. Because we're using Trello, we're using Pivotal Tracker, we're using GitHub, we're using all these different software tools that are separate. They're separate contexts and then are not very easily and well connected. And so if something changes over here, it doesn't automatically change over here. And so we've been we've had a challenge as a globally distributed team with no central offices to keep people on the same page about where we are going, what is relevant, what needs to get done, in what time frame, by whom, and all of these things. And so we've actually, in one of our developer meetings, we decided to scrap our use of Agile or Scrum methodology for software development and instead transition to a software development methodology of our own, which we've since started integrating into other parts of the organization slowly. And this software methodology is called Acorn or Squirrel. And the better name for it that is sort of more descriptive would be state of affairs tree. I'll repeat that. It's a state of affairs tree. And this is actually a concept that comes, or is very much at the core of Scepter as well, which is the project that Holochain emerged from. And its concept of semantic trees. And so the development methodology of state of affairs trees, or Acorn or Squirrel, basically takes the tree structure where you have something here like a node, and then it splits into other nodes, takes that basic structure, sort of a graph type structure, or rather tree structure. It's not actually the same thing, graph or tree. And if you notice the term state of affairs, this is a term that speaks about state of affairs in the world, as in what kind of state of affairs in the world do we want to see come true? And by sort of positing it and then thinking through what other state of affairs need to come true for this one to become true, we build a tree-like structure of sort of smaller and smaller state of affairs that need to come true for the big one to become true. And then you repeat this process sort of fractally until you hit something that can be done today. And this way of thinking through sort of from your ultimate concern, where do you want to end up? What are your like true long-term goals or long-term values that you want to see realized? And decomposing them into smaller and smaller pieces, you guarantee that the work that you're doing is always in service of that highest ultimate concern, and stays connected to it, because oftentimes projects veer away from that because they lose the original raison d'etre, or something in the environment changes, and they don't really realize how something what they're doing today matters to something that they're doing or that they have as a goal long term. And what it also does, it makes visible to the entire organization what the actual sort of decision-making structure of our organization is, and why things are decided to be done in this way rather than another, which then also reduces the resentment that might be generated by some people not liking certain decisions or not liking how certain things happen in a certain way, because it's visible how those decisions emerge from specific goals or specific things that need to be achieved, or at least they can pinpoint who made a decision to change that. And so I think there's a lot of value in not only taking this as a software development methodology, but also as a general framework that all kinds of globally distributed organizations that are not all in close contact with each other locally or geographically could adopt for coming to not exactly consensus, but to sort of momentum on their projects, and to to move forward, to progress. And so I'll just leave it at that for now.
Awesome, thank you. So what I'm hearing is that you're kind of engaged in a process of practicing harnessing collective intelligence. And what that makes me think of is Holochain and Scepter are technologies, but they're not just technologies, they're also ways of organizing socially. And so it requires both. So maybe that kind of ties into how you had mentioned that you were not comfortable with the overall narrative around Holochain. So what is that narrative that is out there that maybe is dominant right now that you're not comfortable with, and how do you want that to change?
Well, it's not exactly that I'm not comfortable with the narrative out there. It's more that I wasn't satisfied with my own narrative of how I want sort of to talk about Holochain and move that out into the world. And so, because in order to, I think, create a document or a meme or an idea that travels out into the world and that is successful in garnering attention and involving intelligent people who have agency, you need to find a way to have the information be as strong as possible. And in order for it to be as strong as possible, it needs to have a lot of information density. And in order to have a lot of information density, you need to have a lot of context. And so I was missing the context that other people could very well understand and relate to. This is the important part, relate to, and related to their own understanding of the world. And so what I ended up doing is basically thinking about how Holochain relates to the broader crypto space. And of course, we've been talking for a long time now about how Holochain was sort of post blockchain technology, and how it came out of a project that has been around longer than Bitcoin, all those things. But I didn't really put all of those pieces together in a way that was satisfying to me and that I thought would land with people, even who are Bitcoin maximalists, for example. And I want to hold myself and us at Holochain and Holo to a high enough standard that we can reach people who are otherwise sort of completely committed to a different idea. And so now that I've sort of reached a narrative, I mean, I can pretty much sort of go through it now here, and we can see what you think and how it lands with our audience. So basically, the whole crypto space that we have before us right now has emerged largely from blockchain, and blockchain has emerged from Bitcoin. So everybody who's been taking the blockchain idea, sort of where that was their starting point of being interested in this whole subject area of how do you manage social processes in a distributed manner, how do you have trust, how do you get beyond trust, how do you have sort of distributed legal system, how do you have cryptocurrency, all these things that people are interested in now and that lots of people are being drawn into for the first time. Lots of these first timers, if you will, start from Bitcoin or start from blockchain, but it's sort of their mental point of origin, if you will. And they don't have the context even for Bitcoin very much. So Bitcoin itself also comes out of a very specific context. Crypto and cypherpunks have been around for decades now, basically since the dawn of the internet. They really developed steam or sort of progress or movement, momentum as a movement. Basically privacy enthusiasts, people who are sort of more on the anarchistic or anti-authoritarian side of the political spectrum, if you will, or sort of just sensibility, if even. And they have created privacy-preserving and expanding technologies since the dawn of the internet. It's just that that's not talked about today because Bitcoin has a coin and there's money. And that's all that people are sort of entering into when they first hear about Bitcoin. It's going up. Great. But what they don't really think about then, at least for the first couple of weeks probably, is, oh, this is actually a tool that allows a Venezuelan suffering under the Maduro regime to receive funds from Czech Republic to escape from Venezuela and go to Chile and then to end up working with friends that he has from overseas. And this is a real story that is a friend of mine who is a Venezuelan who was able to receive funds through Bitcoin and was able to escape that country already now, I think 2 years ago or even more. And so that kind of background, like the thing where it's something that touches people's lives in a very tangible way, and it preserves somebody's liberty or allows somebody to keep privacy that they wouldn't otherwise have if they were excluded from the financial system or forced to participate in the financial system in a tenuous manner. For example, political activists. That is not really the component that people really talk about anymore, because blockchain has become an enterprise thing. It has become an economic thing. And so the adoption of it, like with any technology, it necessarily has to go through this process of sort of watering down in a way, or relating it down the capacity scale, if you will. So the early adopters of Bitcoin were extremely knowledgeable of cryptography, of information science, of computer science, of sort of, they were not only interested on a political level, but they were also capable technologically. They were able to set up their own miners. They were able to configure nodes, all of those things. And so as the technology moves further out into the mainstream, the resolution of information at which people interact with this technology radically reduces, like it radically decreases. So if, for example, my mom interacts with Bitcoin, it's not through downloading a DMG from a GitHub and installing it on her terminal and then operating it from her command line, but she downloads a Coinbase app, right? And it's a different way of interacting with this technology. And it's not that that's necessarily bad, because lots of people don't have either the technological capacity or the interest or the time or the energy or even the wherewithal to deal with that. And so it's not necessarily that something bad is happening when the technology reaches broader circuits of society, but it's just that we have to maintain an awareness of that we're losing some fidelity of information when it moves out into the world. And in order to keep the technology delivering on the goals and values that the original creators and the sort of highest capacity community members have of it, we need to preserve the information at that high fidelity as well, and continue to involve people who are capable, interested, and able to consume and to propagate that information as well at that high resolution. And so this Bitcoin has basically now been around for 10 years already, and it has gone on an amazing journey since its inception point. But its context was very specific. It was the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. Crypto and cypherpunks already had been thinking about how to create digital money since the beginning of the internet, but they had never really succeeded. We got to a point where there was e-gold, there was, which was basically just gold being put into a sort of storage vault in some location, and then sort of accounting happening based on that gold, and people could send each other that. But again, this was had a central point of control, a central company that could be attacked, and it was attacked and it was taken down, and so doesn't exist anymore. And so Bitcoin basically came out of that cypherpunk movement that had a very specific political goal of enabling people to transact financially with each other outside of state control, and out of legacy financial system. And the validity of that necessity was sort of validated with the financial crisis, and it generated a lot of attention for this, as Greeks, Cypriots, Venezuelans, Argentinians, all were dumbfounded when suddenly parts or all of their bank accounts were emptied when that crisis hit, and the government decided to confiscate part of their assets. And so it really drove home the point of you not being in control of your money. You are not in control of your money if you use the legacy financial system, because you are giving it somewhere else, and that somewhere else is subject to rules, to regulations, to seizures, to legal battles, all those things. And so Bitcoin emerged out of that context and was very specific. It was going to do one thing and one thing only: to provide an alternative to the legacy global financial system. And so it had a very specific political goals in that sense, to basically deprive states globally of their capacity to inflate the money supply and to deprive citizens and global citizens of their purchasing power and their financial success, their financial wealth. And since then, well, and Bitcoin, in order to do that, the creator or creators, depending how you want to see it, decided, well, I'll start somewhere else. So basically what they needed to solve in order to get to that goal of creating a alternative to the legacy financial system on a global scale, they need to solve what is called the distributed intrinsic data integrity problem, which is basically, how do you have a bunch of information not live just on servers and that are accessed by clients, which is our internet today, where Facebook owns servers, you go to Facebook on their servers, the information lives there, not on your computer, and then you change information there when you upload your new profile picture or you create a post. But it's always on their turf, on their territory, in their ownership. And they have admin access to your information. They can disable your account, they can delete your picture, they can bar you from their platform, which is all in their prerogative. That's just how it is. But because the infrastructure, the client-server model exists, that kind of power imbalance exists as well. And it's not because people don't want to act peer-to-peer and interact that way, but because it's just too difficult. Basically, the internet was created at the beginning by Tim Berners-Lee with this explicit goal of having people interact directly from computer to computer, from peer to peer, from server to server. It's just that it turns out running a server is a much more difficult, expensive, and hard task than the average person is willing or able to do, to really take on. And so in order to reach the mainstream and make the mainstream use the internet, we saw a development away from that peer-to-peer idea, which was great on paper and worked with sort of the most capable people who were able to set up and run a server for themselves. But it broke down once money came in and the technology was scaled up and made easier to use, but also removed it from the direct control of the users of the internet, not because there was any negative intent necessarily, but simply because it is too difficult and it's not a default option that your data lives on your device. There are other reasons for that as well. There's all kinds of computing reasons. It's not actually that distributed systems are great at everything. So that definitely needs to be said as well. But basically, yeah, Bitcoin had to solve this distributed intrinsic data integrity problem, which I sometimes summarize as, how do you have a bunch of data live out in the open among multiple devices of different people without any one of them being able to tamper with that data after it has been authored? And, or rather, maybe even add some more precision there, after not be able to tamper with that data after it has been authored against agreed upon rules by the users of the application or of this sort of way of operating together. And so that's a hard problem. And it's a computer science problem and a social problem. And so what Bitcoin, the creators of Bitcoin, did was they were unable to solve the fundamental computer science problem of distributing the sort of the data to everybody, where everybody can author their own data, send it out into the world, and have it be represented in a social sphere in a sense, and sort of this distributed net, without everybody having to do the consensus thing. So I'm as you see here, I'm struggling a bit because I'm still working out the exact kinks or sort of the exact framing of this argument or the exact flow of this argument. But basically, Bitcoin solved the problem of how do you have that data live out there without being able to tamper with it by inventing a combined sort of technological solution that implements a game theoretical and economic solution. By basically requiring every single node in the Bitcoin network to hold all of the data of the accumulated history of changes to the blockchain, to the database on their device. Of course, today we have light wallets, all that stuff. Let's leave that out for now. And it created a mechanism called proof of work, which is basically a lottery of distributing the updating power to the blockchain to a random miner that just so happens to solve a mathematical formula, an algorithm, the fastest out of this distributed network, and publishes their solution that everybody else then accepts, and then takes all the accumulated changes to the data that have happened in the meantime, batches them together into a so-called block, and appends that to the end of the blockchain. And so that's the basic mechanism by which blockchain, and Bitcoin specifically, where blockchain comes from, innovated their way out of this problem of distributed intrinsic data integrity, created something called immutability, which is basically, data not being able to change. And also through that solved the double spend problem, which is the problem that you have with any digital currency, unless you know your way around that, which is people being able to just increase their account arbitrarily, or being able to pretend like they didn't spend something whereas they actually did already. And so they solved this problem of distributed intrinsic data integrity through an economic and game theoretical solution, because it basically made it too economically expensive and too difficult to coordinate a concerted attack on the network that would allow an attacker to deploy more than 50% of the hash power of the network, which is sort of the metric we use in Bitcoin to understand how much energy is being dedicated to solving those mathematical problems. And then to distribute inauthentic or sort of false information to this database, to this network. So with that sort of context that we now have about Bitcoin, and knowing where blockchain as a technology comes from, we can understand that it's a very specific solution to this problem of DIDI, distributed intrinsic data integrity. And the whole blockchain and crypto space that we see today with the ICOs, with Ethereum, with programmable data, all these things, smart contracts, has sprung from that particular approach to solving that problem. And in order to understand Holochain, we needed that background to understand how this is a fundamentally hard problem. And it's actually admirable and impressive that Bitcoin was able to find a solution to it in the way that it did, and actually create what is now a multi-billion-dollar industry in some respects, although that seems to be actually sometimes exaggerated because there's wash trading and all these kind of deceptive practices. So it's actually quite hard to understand how big this industry now is, or this technology market. But that being said, it has what I think Bitcoin should be understood as, and actually be thanked for, is having created that fundamental ability of sending value over the internet without censorship, basically, and an interception. And through that, it was able, because it gave people that one certainty, that one single certainty, that this would not be subverted, it would not be sort of changed, it would not be corrupted by some central organization, people were able to put trust into it. And because they were able to put trust into it, that it would not change, this thing would not change over time, they were able to build an entire infrastructure based on that. They were able to build Lightning Network, build up, put in money, expect it to grow, build wallets, build companies. All of these things were built on top of that trust, and in the certainty that Bitcoin would not change on that fundamental level. Now, of course, there's a whole debate about whether it's still true to the Satoshi values. And you see all these forks like Bitcoin Satoshi values, Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Cash, whatever. So it's not that it's immune to that either. And so that's actually another component that we talk about behind closed doors so far, which is sort of Bitcoin having some problems with community management in a sense, because it is not really a community, it's just a technology that doesn't have a governance mechanism. But that's sort of somewhat beside the point right now. So because the people had that trust, because they had that certainty, and because they put in so much effort and energy and financial resources based on that certainty, Bitcoin gave rise to an entire generation of developers, of interested people, of activists, of awake people, I would say, that realize that some things are wrong with our legacy financial and legal and sort of state system, if you will, and that we need to do something about that, and that this particular medium of exchange, Bitcoin, allows us to trust in something else. And just that, with that certainty, we can take that as our guiding light in a sense. And it produced a lot of wealth for the most intelligent and sort of perceptive and awake people who were the very first ones to hear about Bitcoin and to actually see the potential of it very early on. And because it produced all that wealth for those people, regardless now of inequality issues and all those things, they were able to then take that money, have sort of, in a sense, fuck you money, excuse my French, and deploy that capital to whatever other goals they had in mind. And because they tended to have sort of libertarian-ish anarchist goals, they gave rise to an entire generation of other projects, companies, ventures, ideas, communities, businesses that had a reason for existing other than economic gain. And in that whole environment, a lot of experimentation can happen and has happened. And so we ourselves at Holochain and Holo are, in that sense, indebted to Bitcoin and to Ethereum and sort of the whole technology space and crypto space that has sprung from it, because without it, we probably would never have been able to raise the funds we did in the ICO and to use those funds to deploy our technology. And so I actually don't really like the sort of constant Bitcoin bashing in both in our community as well as the broader space, because it neglects the very real benefits that Bitcoin has brought to the world and overly focuses on the negative sides, the drawbacks that it has, which are real. We shouldn't leave them out. But I think in order for us to speak to a broad enough audience that wants to put their energy and attention and intelligence and agency behind any effort that promises to give them a set of tools that allows them to bring their values out into the world, we need to be able to legitimize and to appreciate the efforts they have put in and that actually allow us now for existing this way. And so with all of that as context, we can now sort of shift to how Holochain fits into that picture, not only on sort of being indebted to Bitcoin, the crypto space, for being able to raise all those funds from people, but also talk about it, like how it compares to the technology of blockchain and crypto and how to properly understand it. And so the way I've started thinking about this, and again, this is still a rough version of the narrative we will come to put out into the world, but it's basically that Holochain sort of rolls back to before the Bitcoin point, to before Bitcoin became a thing and before everybody thought Bitcoin and blockchain is the only way that you can solve the distributed intrinsic data integrity problem and the double spend problem, all those things, and basically takes another hard look at this problem and tries to figure out a way to solve this problem in a much more nimble, much more agile way. And in order to do that, we have to look at the Holochain context out of which Holochain emerged, and then we can go into how Holochain solves that problem. So Holochain itself wasn't really even a term until 2 years ago. So Holochain was what we've now come to call Holochain, and what we've already built this massive infrastructure on with Holo and all these things, actually emerges out of a much larger project called Scepter. And Scepter is, sort of, to put it into one sentence, a top to bottom rewrite of the entire computing stack of computers, internet, everything. And it's sort of comparable, although I would say even deeper a project than Urbit, which some people who are familiar with sort of next level type stuff have or might be familiar with. I actually once 2 years ago spent a 2-hour conversation with an Urbit proponent, and we both came away from that conversation basically realizing, yes, Urbit is interesting, Scepter is interesting, but Scepter is far deeper, far more wide-reaching, far bigger in scope than Urbit is. And so Scepter is too hard for me to explain, and I don't understand myself. I understand sort of how to think about it. I understand what the philosophical concepts are that are at play in it, but I'm not a computer scientist, and so I struggle to really explain it to people who are far more knowledgeable about the specifics of code and how it's being produced. But suffice it to say, it's currently broken down to sort of 6 sub-projects. And one of those is Holochain. There are other ones. There's protocol of pluggable protocols. There is neural internetworking. And so you see these are sort of concept descriptions, but not actually product or sort of technology descriptions yet, because Scepter is just too big in scope to really have been created in its fullness. And before I talk more about Scepter, I need to explain where Scepter comes from. And Scepter comes from the MetaCurrency project. And the MetaCurrency project is basically a loose term, a loose collective of people that share a certain sort of sense of the world, that the economic and social systems that we are operating on currently are not up to the task of carrying us forward into the future, into the information age, which we are already at the cusp of, but really haven't entered yet into completely. And with the information age dawning on us, we need to radically upgrade our capacity in terms of being able to coordinate at global scale in order for us to make the transition well, to avoid some of the potential drawbacks and negative outcomes of that transition, which might very well be war, famine, existential crises, all these different things. As sort of the old meaning making and coordination structures of society break down. And Scepter, well, and the MetaCurrency project is sort of made up of multiple people who know each other, who have worked together over the years. Some of the founders are Arthur Brock and Eric Harris-Braun, but there are many other people involved sort of in various ways. It's not really like a company, but it's more people who know each other and who do their own thing in their own time, but who share that certain sensibility and who realize the magnitude of the task in front of us and are committed to doing something about it. And that tended to be expressed mostly so far in lots and lots of research, conversation, deep philosophical investigation, technology development, and basically a volunteer-run, volunteer-driven effort of figuring out all these open questions, in a sense, that are sort of on the firmament. And out of that, these many conversations over many years now, I think 15 years or so, came an understanding that in order for us to approach those problems from a fundamentally sound perspective and approach, we need to not only get the technology right, which is what everybody usually focuses on, at least sort of the more hard-nosed people in the world, if you will. Like, we just need to create the right technology and everything will be fine. Nor, like, that's not enough, nor is sort of the, oh, we just need to have a spiritual awakening, man, type people. Like, everybody will wake up, man, like, just smoke more weed and do DMT, man. Like, that kind of thing is not sufficient either. Because it's not stable. These things might emerge, like you might have a rush of development in technology, or you might have a rush of development in consciousness or sort of agency, as I like to think about it now. But then that doesn't settle into a stable configuration that is able to persist through time. Some guru might have an amazing revelation about the world that then draws the interest and devotion of a loyal group of followers. But those followers then either turn into cults, or they don't have children, or they kill each other or themselves, or they sort of get absorbed again into society because they actually can't make their cult or their community work economically. And so these sort of momentary outbursts of amazing potential being actualized can't find a way to persist through time and stay at that level. And so they inevitably regress to the mean, if you will. And so what they realized is, in order for us to make real progress on these issues and to get to new stable configurations that really raise the level, we need to have a confluence of the sort of technology part and the consciousness part. And I started thinking about this as agency, as in consciousness, which basically means people being able to act in the world effectively, which basically just means they're able to solve more problems than they're generating. And if they're able to solve more problems than they're generating, then they have agency, and they are capable of being an effective agent in the world, if you will. And then they can make use of the available technology in a way that doesn't sort of subvert their agency, because we are always and forever creating new technologies that then change us. We change the world changes us. And so if we are creating technology that a vast set of people in society is unable to operate in a capable agentic manner, then they will have a stratification in our society of inequality in terms of being sort of above the API and below the API, or rather sort of people at the top of society, which doesn't mean money. It means power, it means influence, it means information understanding, it means various ways that people can exist at the top of a hierarchy. They are able to extend their agency far more than the vast majority of people. And that's a problem, because then you, unless you have cooperation between people, you end up having all kinds of issues where a Mark Zuckerberg's agency is extended so much massively out into the world, but the people who are using his platform are not even capable of operating the algorithm that serves them up the news in a way that doesn't like make them more enraged or sort of have emotional spikes and all those things. And so in order for us to solve these problems that are coming at us quickly, and to have people be effective agents in the world, and to really move forward from stable foundations, which everybody is always so eager to neglect, like so eager to jump over, and like, no, we just need to get to the next thing. No, we need to get both of those to grow in concert. And then what we have is we have agency on the one hand. People who have agency are able to deploy it and are able to increase it. And then we have technology, which I think of as extensions or crystallizations of agency. Basically, somebody who has agency can create something, a tool, let's say a hammer or Facebook or whatever it may be, that extends his agency, his way of interfacing with the world into the world, and then he makes it accessible to other people. But then they are operating on his agency. And so if you develop that agency in one person, they get so far, they create that, you have that problem where people are not able to operate the technology because they can't reverse engineer it, they don't understand it, they are not able to control their own impulses, to manage their own emotional lives, their own maturity. And so we have this sort of fundamental problem of immature people using technology they're not able to operate well, and being made even more infantile and sort of reactive and ignorant by using technology that that they don't understand. It's sort of like this. I like to think about it in this way of mathematics, in a sense. Like if your value is like 0.9, then whatever you multiply that with, it will be less than 1, and it will probably go lower over time. If it's at 1, you'll stay the same, you'll stay fine, you'll be robust. If it's at 1.1, you'll get better over time. And so the way I like to think about it is like how I also think about my task in the world is getting people in my sphere of influence from 0 to 1 in agency. So Peter Thiel talks about 0 to 1 in terms of companies, of like establishing your personal monopoly as a company. I think of 0 to 1 in terms of people. I want people around me to be able to solve their own problems faster than they're generating new ones. Because then I can trust on them not to be a drag on my energy and my resources and my capacity to act in the world. And I can enter into collaboration with them. And we can work on growing ours, how we like to call it, which is sort of growing the pie, rather than fighting about who gets what or how big the pieces are. And so that's a whole lot of philosophical exploration that's necessary to really dig deep into where all of this Holochain stuff is coming from. And then when we go back to it, we can understand it better and put it into that context. So, okay, so what we need is we need to have consciousness and technology, or agency and extended or crystallized agency, grow together. Because if they grow together, we can sort of have a ladder. Like we can have a ladder, walk upwards into the heaven, if you will, and we can have new spokes on the ladder, be stable, that people can actually put a step on and walk upwards. And then we can have another spoke here and another spoke here, and we enter into stable configurations. And one more piece that sort of, I think, really ties it together is that agency is not just a phenomenon of humans, but it's a phenomenon of all life. In the way that you yourself as a human are made up of smaller units of agency, which are organs, which are cells, which are molecules, and so, or bacteria and viruses, and all these different forms of life that make up you. You are a unit, yes, but you are a unit of units, and you are also a unit in a unit of units. So it's sort of this fractal, holographic, holarchic, holonic structure where cells, the cells that make up you, have already figured out how to operate at a billion trillion level together in a powerful way, and where the interests of one of the cells is not necessarily at odds with the interests of all the other trillions of cells. Because they are configured in a stable configuration, of course, with a temporal limit that works, and where it's actually in the interest of the individual cells to be part of a collective that supports each member, and that is capable of growing its energy supply, of getting more energy in than it's consuming. And that's basically what life does. We're on this planet, and we have this huge energy generator up in the sky called the sun that's blasting our planet with energy. And our planet is basically figuring out how to dissipate this energy to the rest of the universe in the most efficient manner, and we are the consequence. All right, so that went sort of really deep and really far and really sort of abstract in some sense, but I think it's necessary to go to that depth to understand how deeply rooted the specific technology choices that we're making day to day in Holochain are in deep philosophy, deep understanding, embodied understanding of the world, and a deep relationship with life and sort of biological ways of thinking about the world, and taking inspiration from biology and natural systems to figure out how to create social systems that also scale to that level. Because if we are going to be a multi-billion people planet, we need to get good at putting into relationship each and every member with each and every other member in a way that doesn't lead to unnecessary conflict. I don't believe that conflict is ever is always unnecessary, but as little as possible. And so, go ahead.
No, go ahead if you have another thing you want to add.
Yeah, so with that in the back, we can now sort of descend down again from the origin point and arrive at Holochain. So with what the metacurrency people basically realized, oh, maybe I should add one more thing where the metacurrency stuff came from, was basically Arthur and Eric meeting each other at I think a currency design conference at some point, I think in 2006 or something like that, basically early 2000s. And they then creating companies where their only goal was basically to figure out how to do social processes well. And what they ended up figuring out is that, oh, we humans operate by currencies. What we use language and markers and signs and signals and currencies to allow us to, in a way, defer violence. Because basically what humans are is a social species that has figured out how to avoid intraspecific violence as much as possible. So in the wild, in like sort of tribal settings, and if you look also at ape societies, they're able to scale only ever up to about 150, 200, maybe 250 individuals, because their signaling system and their way of coordinating and structuring their tribe is only capable of holding that amount of information in a sense, and to distribute resources well, that doesn't generate too much resentment, that there's not constant war between individual members. And so in a way, what we humans have done is we've created an incredibly powerful means of deferring violence between substituent members or constituent members of a group into the future. In the way that we figured out that if we can coordinate, if we can talk, if we can signal to each other, if we can coordinate our actions and collaborate on being effective actors in the environment and using our combined agency to generate new energy opportunities, new opportunities to consume energy from our environment, then we don't need to consume each other. We don't need to fight each other over what is available, or even kill each other to get the energy that is in each other. Didn't expect to get into cannibalism today, but what do you know? And so this is another subject that is very close to my heart and sort of intense research interest in me, which I haven't really brought into the Holochain world much, but this is called generative anthropology. And it's basically a way of thinking and theorizing and using like ideas about how humans are different from other animals. Basically where that origin point, that departure from other animals was, and what made us so different. And it focuses in on the central point, the central idea of we invented language as a way to defer violence. And so that happened, at least according to this sort of discourse, when sort of the first group of proto-humans converged on some object of desire, let it be a kill, like some kind of prey or whatever. And just stick with me here. It might sound a bit strange, but and basically there was a balance in the internal sensation that the members of that group had between their appetite for the central object of desire, and their fear of being attacked by other members of the group. So you have a sort of equilibrium of, I want to go towards it, but I fear retribution and sort of attack. And sort of being arrested in that, I don't know what to do, like to move forward or to move backward. That's where consciousness was born, in a sense, where you gain that social awareness that there are others around me, and we are not just, it's not just me, but I am part of this group. And in that moment, one member of that group might have, it's sort of just theorizing, but might have made some gesture or some movement or some tone, whatever it may be, that became the very first act of language, the very first sign. And this became then the sign, the very first sign was basically the sign for sacrality, for the sacred. Basically, it becomes the thing that allows us to refer to that moment in the future again, or to refer again in the future to that moment where that sort of situation happened, if we make that gesture or we make that tone, and through that, arrest the members of our group again, and again avert violence when some conflict happens, which is always the case. And so humans actually, because we are a mimetic species, we are able to perceive each other and we're able to share attention. We are at constant risk of extinguishing ourselves. We are, unlike other animals, capable, possibly more dangerous to ourselves than the planet is. And so this is because we have what is called third order attention. So other mammals can have second order attention, which is I see you seeing me. No, I see you, which is basically I can just see you and I can follow what you do. I can follow you, what you're attending to. But I can't, like what animals can't do and what humans can do is I see you seeing me. And this is the origin of our ability to share attention, and not only attention, but also intention. And so I can signal to you, I'm going to do this, and you can understand what I'm going to do, and then we can coordinate. We can actually divide our labor. We can say, I will run around the rock, you will stand there with a spear, and then I will shock the animal that's behind the rock, and you will be there and you can stick it. And that's like, it's basically a way for us to coordinate and collaborate together, and to then put the energy we have available and our capacity to act in the world to use in a shared goal rather than in conflict. And so what you're doing when you do that is you create a superorganism. You create the beginnings of what you could call a multi-individual. It's not the individual, it's not us as humans as the sort of ultimate unit, the social organism, basically a unit that consists of other humans, of many, many humans. And so, wow, we really went deep here. But so with that in mind, we can understand how powerful of a thing language really is, and how understanding language well and being able to wield language well allows you to collaborate with a very broad set of people. And so this is actually part of my interest in language and in sort of all kinds of ways of knowing things, because it allows me to have always a possibility of relating to somebody that I don't know yet. And that I can find some common point of origin in a sense, and to then build a relationship based on that. And so I'm applying this understanding also actually in this light paper writing exercise by inviting the Bitcoin maximalist and building that bridge, and then figuring out what our mutual point of origin is, and then sort of going back to that point of origin, and then based on that, building a new shared narrative together, rather than sort of us being in our divided universes. Okay.
Cool. So there's a lot of stuff that you mentioned that's like super, super interesting. Like too much that I can even like
Right.
find something. But one thing that's coming up is the idea of like collectivism and individualism, and how it seems to me that they're often seem to be in opposition to each other. And so I've noticed in the Holochain space that there seem to be some people who are coming in from the kind of anarchist, maybe libertarian, Bitcoin maximalist place, but they're also interested in Holochain. And there also seem to be people who are coming in from like the left, who maybe are more inclined towards like socialism, communism, interested in fighting for social safety nets, equality, fairness. So it sounds like you're kind of describing a bit why that might be the case, why that it seems to attract people who supposedly have opposite political views, but they see something, a common interest somehow.
Right. Right. Yes. Politics can be understood, not is, but can be understood as another sort of a last ditch attempt to avoid violence. Like just another layer that we put between violence and the present. And so I actually don't think of myself as a right person or a left person or a center person. I have opinions and perceptions and inclinations in all of these aspects. And because I'm a young white male that is on an ascendant path and is standing to gain a lot from the proceeds of his productivity, I tend to incline to quite a couple of libertarianish positions, because that is the position that young males tend to occupy if they're capable, because they want as least of an imposition on their productive capacity as possible, so that they can establish a stable position in society and in life, and then gain access to reproductive capacity and build a family. So you already notice here, I'm using biological language and sort of lots of deeper concepts than give me my guns and my taxes back, because I understand this arena, this discourse on a much deeper level than sort of just the basic political positions. And so somebody who, well, let's not start that way, but I think of people who see themselves as being on some part of the political spectrum as sort of, unfortunately, still caught in the very real sort of culture wars and political wars and sort of these manifestations of an inability of the polity and the society and the global society and the community that they exist in to figure out a stable way of functioning where every member of that community, polity, society, etc., global society, can find a way of relating to every other member of that community, polity, etc., and where each and everybody's inclinations, perceptions, sensitivities, intuitions, perspectives are integrated into a whole that works. And this is sort of why I find a lot of my work to gravitate to anything and everything that has to do with nudging conflict out of the meat space, in a sense, of people space and into informational space. As in, if people are able to create language, create tools, create relationships, create mutual shared understanding, they can avoid conflict that tends to turn bloody over time. So everybody's intuitions have validity, but they have validity at different scales and in different contexts. And what ends up happening with people who describe themselves as strongly this thing or that thing, or libertarian or communist or whatever, is that they take their intuitions and their perspectives about the world and they universalize them. They make them a universal stance to the world that everybody should hold, and then everything would be fine. Whereas I think that, and this is not just me, but I'll just speak from my own personal perspective and experience, the intuitions of a communist are great. They say something important about the world, like the weak need protection, and we shouldn't forget about the people who are not able to speak for themselves, or in order for us to not fall prey to international capital roaming around the world, having no loyalties whatsoever, we need to preserve our capacity as workers to self-determination, all those kind of things. So there are always valid seeds or sparks or sort of parts of a message that ends up becoming an ideology. But they tend to, because they're ideologies and because they have an interest in replicating as much as possible, they try to break down their ideas to such a inane level that anybody can grasp them, and it becomes a sort of a dumb replication mechanism. That's basically what ideologies are. They're sort of stable meme plexes, stable meme complexes that coast. And in a way, language can also be an extension of agency. Language can be an extension of agency of the people who are language creators. And then people who use that language unwittingly act out these stories about the world without understanding where they're coming from and whether there could have been other decisions made in the creation of those stories. And so this is another reason why it's so crucially important that people are able to tell their own story and are not beholden to any particular story taking precedence over their own ability to tell a story. It doesn't mean that they can't share stories with other people, but that they become the authors of their own story rather than being subscribers only to other people's stories, especially long dead stories, which it's not me bashing religion at all. I actually think religion has massive validity and value in the world, but if it is not brought into a personal relationship with the subscriber to that religion, they will just be acting out a dead person's ideas without understanding how they relate to their own life and their own context, because culture and the world changes. So political ideologies and religions and all these things can replicate themselves, and the communist has valid intuitions, yes, but they tend to apply only to a small scale, in the sense that communism is great in the family. Like, I'm not going to my mother is not going to hand me a bill upon my 18th birthday and charge me for all the mothering and caretaking and feeding services that she's provided me upon my entry into this world, and then send me out and like have nothing to do with me. That's not how our family works. Family is a unit of reproduction, and so her interest is actually in me being successful in the world, and so she is not actually charging me for the care that she gives me because she's interested in retaining the relationship. Communism tends to struggle when you scale it up beyond the point of the family or even a small community, because then you need other currencies than love and care and concern to take on a role in scaling a functional political system or just social system, regardless of political. And so, yeah, this might ruffle some feathers, but I'm going to say it anyways. This sort of caretaking concern intuition, the protection of the weak intuition, tends to come from people who either themselves are sort of either not themselves in a stable or powerful position in society, which is because they're amenable to that position. And you tend to see this with communism being mostly something of underclass acceptance. And then some people who are sort of in middle class or upper class as sort of a social position. You always hear about some champagne socialists who actually hate the poor, but just don't like the rich. Or don't actually care for the poor, but like the rich, hate the rich, or the people who are higher up than them. And the other tendency, or the other place where communist or sort of caretaking concern intuitions tend to rise is in females and women, or people who have feminine sensibilities or cognitive styles as well. And so it is basically the application of the mothering instinct to members of the polity that are weak, that are not able to care for themselves, that are maybe not children, but that still are at the receiving end of power and be oppressed, or so just the losers, in a sense, that the people that are not being taken care of by society. And that's a valid and powerful and respectable and admirable instinct, and needs to be taken seriously and needs to be integrated into the functioning of the polity, but it cannot be the overriding concern that is sort of taken care of at the expense of everything else. And so this is where then ideologies and movements fail, when they reach beyond the limit of their applicability and want to become the only operating principle that a society adopts. The same thing applies to libertarianism. Not like libertarianism is a sort of weird ideology, because actually never has been politically relevant, really. It was only ever sort of something that is sort of this little brother of conservatism, which is because libertarianism is basically the young man's political position. Because the young man wants, as I said earlier, wants to be able to produce. He wants to be able to build a stable and admirable and respectful position in society, and through that gain access to reproduction, namely females, and establish a family. And so what he is advocating for in the polity is to retain as much as possible the proceeds from his productivity. If he is a farmer, if he is a producer, if he is a craftsman, whatever, he wants to have as much as possible of the returns, the money, whatever, that he generates by his productive capacity in order to get to a stable position in society and then gain reproduction. Conservatism, so the conservative stance, is the stance of established males and women with a lot of children, which basically happens once people are successful in establishing their family, successful in establishing a position in society, and their interest and their incentives shift from wanting to establish themselves or wanting to get resources from other people who are producing because they're not able to create them themselves, to keeping as much as possible of their already invested resources and energy and retaining that and defending it against other people who want more of it. And so this is basically, I think, a much higher resolution description of how a political position comes about, not just as a sort of ideological position, but as a natural outcome of a person's position within society. And it actually shifts over the lifetime of people when they become successful. People tend to become more conservative with age and with their ability to move up the social ladder. Now, this is not entirely true, because some people move up the social ladder without becoming conservative, but these trends generally apply, and it tends to be that people who don't have many kids aren't as conservative. So I think the takeaway that we should take from this is that there is validity to all of these positions, because all of these positions in society are necessary for a functional operational society. You need to have people who are advocating for the weak. You need to have people who are who can't wait to establish themselves in society and harness their productive capacity to society's goals and to produce things that are valuable to the other members of society, who are producing resources that everybody else can also draw on in some sense. And then you also need sort of the conservatives, the warriors, the defenders of the polity, the people on the wall that are holding a lookout to everything that might be subverting the polity and changing culture too quickly and disrupting the structure of everything. Because if you change things too quickly and if you open yourselves too quickly to foreign influences, you enter into chaos and you probably will fail as a society. And this is probably also a generator of that build the wall sentiment among conservatives in the US, at least. I don't want to really tie this to political conversation, but just so that people understand where this is coming from and don't simply point fingers and say these are Nazis and they're like they have no legitimate reason whatsoever for wanting any kind of borders whatsoever. But to find that point of origin that you can agree on, hey, what we probably can all agree on is we want to have some stability in our polity. We don't want everything to be upside down all the time. If people can agree on that, then you can start to talk about what are sensible, permeable membranes to entry into the society, and what are the rules by which the society needs to be organized internally so as not to produce as much like conflict as we currently have. And basically what we've created over the past couple of centuries, even though the Enlightenment had its downsides as well, is an incredibly powerful, what John Vervaeke probably would call a psychotechnology, and a set of technologies that allow our societies to scale to a global level. I mean, the nation state is sort of, so far, has been the biggest stable configuration of a superorganism, in a sense, a human superorganism. And we've even gone beyond that, which is a sort of the United States, for example, a 300 million type nation state that has substituent organizations as states. And then you even have the UN, and sort of we're now basically at the default global. And so this is another, I think, pointer and a driver, or a pointer to the really big and the really strong importance of us figuring this social thing out, because we are now by default global, and the consequences of somebody's actions in Wyoming travel to Calcutta in a matter of minutes, depending on what they're doing. And so we now no longer have the luxury of acting on a cultural software, if you will, a set of ideas, habits, norms, etc., that don't take into account far-reaching consequences. And so we need to get as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, to that 0 to 1 in agency, so that they are able to solve more problems than they generate, and then to understand how they fit into a larger context, starting with their family and their social circle, and then moving outward, and approaching their success in life and the world and society, and their ability to bring change to society and the world from that sort of internal sense of agency first, that then enters into the world, into stable relationships with other people who are full agents, and that are capable of creating supra-agentic structures, and from there move out. And because they're doing it from a position of stability and sort of this ecosystemic gradual capacity increase, rather than a sort of rush to success or a rush to the next solution, the immediate solution, we can build an ecology of communities solving the problems that they themselves have locally, sharing their learnings with the global community, but retaining sovereignty over the way that they do things. And us then building this sort of huge ecology of these communities and ways of working in the world, and exchanging things and having flows happen from here to there, etc. And so that is my articulation of how I understand metacurrency and other currents of thought that I have been observing and integrating into this. And you can go from here wherever you want to, and we can also, again, bring it later down to the holochain level.
So yeah, you're describing like an ecology of social organisms responding to local needs as a kind of a way of humanity evolving past the kind of like current paradigm of nation states and stuff like this, for the realities of a globalized civilization of humanity, being able to communicate and coordinate to be able to survive in the new realities.
Yes, and this is something that Matthew Schutte, the communications director of Holochain and Holo, has been talking about since 2017, at least as far as I'm aware of, which is something that he says Holochain enables uniquely among technologies, in a sense, which is it gives people a technological substrate and framework in which they can codify their own norms, rules, acceptable modes of being, if you will, cast them into code, basically, at least partially, because we actually don't think that code is enough. You need to have the social process as well, but the code can support that. And then to have that hold people to account. And this is a very key core concept of Holochain, Scepter, Metacurrency, accountability, which means this is actually probably a good point to bring up here, also with respect to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's core proposition was sort of anonymity or pseudonymity and autonomy in a sense, which I think that's, at least the autonomy part, is something that we can definitely agree on. Not necessarily anonymity. You need to have anonymity, or at least the option of anonymity. But if you want to have stable social organisms grow from your technology, you can't have only anonymity. You need to have identity. Because identity is the way that we keep track of each other's standing and status and where we're at, and are able to assess whether we want to work with somebody or not, how we want to relate to them, all of those things. And so accountability provides the means by which we can establish identity and reputation. Because if somebody is accountable to the rules of the community they are a part of or that they are interacting with, they are being held to account. So you can trust that the rules that are at play in your community are being enforced with respect to every member of the community, which gives you that certainty anchor, that trust that I described earlier about Bitcoin, that you don't fear that you're the only sucker who is following the rules and everybody else is just exploiting you. And you need to have that trust that you are one among all of the members that are following the rules in order for you to put aside your defensiveness and your sort of selfishness that seeks its own benefit to the exclusion of others, and instead seeks its own benefit in the inclusion of others, or rather in the relationship to others, by acting in concert with others, by putting aside your very immediate selfish needs, and instead entering into relationship and collaboration with other members of the community, and through that to become that super organism that, instead of consuming itself or entering into conflict with, where every member enters into conflict with each other, you turn your attention, your energy, your intention to the external world and look for opportunities to acquire energy and to generate more energy than to consume it only. And so we need to have that capacity not only at the small family scale, where it mostly works naturally already, even without sophisticated crypto technology. And then to be able to scale that up from there, but maintain coherence at every single escalating scale. Because if we move from the family to the community, and from the community to the city, and from the city to the polity, and from the polity to the region, and from the region to the world, these are massive leaps in scale. And so the same systems that apply down here break down immediately as the scale increases. And so you need to have that fundamental trustworthy substrate of crypto technology that allows you to trust that every single member of this group is following the rules, and for you to not fear that you're being taken advantage of because somebody else might be subverting the rules. And I need to surface here right now that we have 10 minutes left because I actually have another call in 10 minutes. And I actually love this conversation. It's giving me so much benefit that I want to carry this forward like for another 2 hours.
Cool.
And so what I would suggest instead of doing that is to, for me to drop off now, like in 1 or 2 minutes, once we do our little thing here, and then for us to have another conversation. And you can go ahead either and publish this as sort of part 2, or you can wait for us to have another conversation and then to splice it together and make like a whole thing, or however you want to do that.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I've been writing down stuff this whole time that I haven't gotten to like even 10% of what what's been coming up for me. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of potential to do another like part 2 or part. Yeah.
Awesome.
Multi-part.
I think we can make this a whole series because I think you have a lot of like probably points you want to touch on that we can extrapolate as well out. And I'm loving this conversation as the core of my light paper work. In the sense that what you're sort of giving me an opportunity for is to practice and explore. Like what I'm doing right now is I'm actually thinking. I'm not just putting out things that are in here, but I'm putting into new relationships things that are already in here.
Yeah.
And it's giving me massive material that I can use in my own like writing for this. I'm putting into relationship all these kind of things that have been jumping around in my mind, but I've never had enough time or opportunity to really go deep on them and to figure them out. And so I'm loving this thing.
Cool. Because it's also meeting my need to go a bit deeper and to touch upon a lot of stuff that had been part of my consciousness.
Right.
Like some of the things that you've mentioned really surprised me that it connected to other stuff that I've also thought about. Mm-hmm. Like the whole thing about the sun blasting energy on the planet and like humanity emerging as like this is physics. This is really
it's called dissipation-driven adaptation, and it's basically a theory of abiogenesis. Yes.
Yeah, I think that I might have seen that paper or the news about it when it came out a while ago. Right. It's like basically a theory about evolution, like the evolution of life emerging from basically entropy, the movement of energy. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. But then I also am really interested in kind of coming back to like, okay, but what are we really talking about in terms of Holochain and Scepter and this kind of stuff?
But I'm loving that we're going so deep because it gives us that shared context that then will make the communication about the nuances of Holochain so much easier and so much more meaningful as well. And I think this type of conversation is something we did in 2017 with Arthur and Eric and sort of talking about all this stuff. And that I feel like some people in the community have been missing since then. And a lot of the blog posts we've been writing have been much more focused on the day-to-day or sort of on the updates than they have been on the concepts and the ideas and the goals and all those kind of things. So this is great for that.
Awesome. Okay, so do you want to call it for now, and then we'll be in touch about when we want to.
Awesome. Yes, my heart is alive right now, and I'm like, whoa! Like I've just figured out the next piece of what I need to do to get these light papers out. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye, Moritz.
Bye-bye.